Good morning. Welcome to the 15th annual First Amendment Day. This is where we talk about the First Amendment and all of its many dimensions. We've got a full day of activities, starting with name, image, likeness, talking about student athletes in the marketplace of ideas. We're going to have a keynote at the end of the day talking about student protest. So there's going to be a whole rich diversity of information that I hope you will enjoy. And I'm going to introduce the moderator, who is then going to introduce the speaker of our event. So Miss Riley, come on up. She is a master's student here. She's a former athlete and she's interested in sports broadcasting. And she has graciously agreed to be the moderator for today's event. Welcome. And if you did not scan the QR code, you could do that at the end. All right. Riley. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This morning, I have the privilege of introducing our UNC Director of Athletics, Bubba Cunningham. I have to admit that I was pleasantly surprised when they asked me, a former Wolfpack volleyball player, to introduce our UNC Athletic Director, but now I proudly call myself a Tar Heel. Bubba became the UNC Athletic Director in 2011, and since then, UNC has accomplished numerous academic achievements, opened multiple new athletic facilities, and won 22 national titles. During Bubba's time in Chapel Hill, more than 3,500 UNC student athletes have been named to the ACC Honor Roll. UNC's overall student athlete GPA has been higher than a 3.0 for 11 straight semesters, with a 3.25 GPA in the spring of 2024. UNC teams have had huge success under Bubba's leadership, including NCAA championships in men's basketball, men's and women's soccer, men's and women's lacrosse, women's tennis, and field hockey since 2011. Bubba's leadership has also extended outside of Chapel Hill, as he has served on numerous NCAA committees over the last 2 decades. In 2019, he worked for the Atlantic Coast Conference to lead the launch of the ACC network, which has been amazing for our conference. Bubba will be the chair of the 2024 NCAA Men's Basketball Selection Committee, and I hope it's okay, but I plan to send you my brackets prior to Selection Sunday. On a personal note, Bubba earned his bachelor's and master's degree from Notre Dame, another ACC school. This morning, I'm excited to hear Bubba speak about the evolution of the ACC, which has evolved from 7 teams in 1953 to 18 teams today, as well as the evolution of NIL and its potential impact on current student athletes. It is my privilege to now introduce Bubba Cunningham.
Riley, and welcome to Carolina, Riley. We're glad to have you. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you guys. When I was asked to do it, I'm like, why would you ask me that much first? But I'm happy to be here, and I'll share a couple of thoughts about the. Just a couple of thoughts of some things that have happened before I get into really NIL and athletics. A few years ago, when George Floyd was murdered up in Minnesota, it really created a lot of discussion about what kind of rights do you have in free speech and things of that nature. And we started talking about it as an athletic department. And it really struck me as we were trying to work with our teams and our coaches and the student athletes, what can they do and what can't they do? And so it starts about what are your rights? And so as a US citizen, you have rights. You have all kinds of rights as a citizen, and you're protected by the Constitution and protected by the laws. But as you join different communities, those rights don't get diminished, but what you can and can't do starts to narrow down. And so when you join this university community, there's a whole bunch of rules that you have to live by. As a freshman, you can't have a car. You have to live on campus. There's things that you accept as joining another group that you can or can't do. It doesn't minimize your rights, but it does limit what you can do. And then after you join the university, you join a team. Now you're part of a team, and the coach says, these are the following things that you have to do to be a member of our team. And so all of those things start to narrow down what your behavior is, but it doesn't change your right. And so as we were going through all of that, because we were trying to think about what are we going to allow our students to do? Are they allowed to protest? Are they allowed to demonstrate? What can they do? And so we had to really think very critically about that. Rights as a citizen, rights as a member of this community, rights as you're on your team. And so what we came to is this freedom of expression is that when you report to an event, you had to wear what we issued you. And you couldn't wear your own shirt, you couldn't wear your own symbolism, whatever it is. But what we would allow is that you could write on your shoes, or if you taped your wrist or you could write on in your own personal message on those things. But you couldn't use your own shirt. And it's just interesting because a couple of years later, we get into the NIL space. And so I think it gave us a framework for deciding how are we going to set our rules of engagement with our student athletes relative to NIL and their right to monetize their name, image, and likeness. So it really did start our conversation earlier than the legislation when it changed. And so what I would like to talk about is how do we now walk ourselves through name, image, and likeness. I've got a few slides here, a timeline of things that have happened over time, just to kind of set the context of where we are today relative to NIL and what student rights are. Back in 1906 is when the NCAA started. And I don't know if you may be familiar, but it started because we had 9 football players die playing football. And Teddy Roosevelt was president of the United States and said, we can't have this. We have to create something, a national governing body that will protect the health and welfare and safety of our student athletes. And so that's when the NCAA started. There were all kinds of different rules and things that started between 1906 and 1971, particularly in 1956 when we started scholarships. Grant aids for students that participate in sport. That's when scholarships really started. And then in 71, we started an association for women's athletics. 72, I think you know, Title IX passed. And then the AIW, which is the women's program, that morphed into the NCAA right after 1981. So that was Anson Dorrance's first NCAA or national championship. And then he went on to win 21 NCAA championships. So he's had 22, but 21 of those were NCAA. And then things really started to change in 1984. I don't know how familiar you are with 1984. Oklahoma and Georgia sued the NCAA. The NCAA sold all the television rights for football games. And there were only 1 or 2 games on each year or each Saturday, and the NCAA controlled the right. Oklahoma and Georgia said, that's not right. We should have the right to monetize the football games and be able to sell those independently. They went all the way to the Supreme Court and they did win. 1988, so you started to see a little bit more commercial activity after 1984. I don't know if you remember that, well, you wouldn't remember, you guys are way too young. ESPN was created in 1979. So you started to have cable television coming out in 79. USA Today started in 1982, which really started to have a national distribution of sports and entertainment through USA Today. And then when Michael Jordan got out of here, he was the first real celebrity athlete that started to endorse products at the collegiate level. So the commercial activity from the late 70s into the early 80s really started to take off. And then after that lawsuit, Notre Dame signed the first independent contract. There were other television contracts, the CFA, which is the College Football Association. They were negotiating on behalf of a smaller group, not the full NCAA, but a smaller group. Notre Dame broke away from that, signed their own television contract. And that started the launch of all the conference contracts. The basketball contract for the NCAA tournament was signed, and that was the first $1 billion contract. Again, the escalation of all of the revenue associated with sport began to create some of the challenges that we have today. 2014 is when O'Bannon sued the NCAA for name, image, and likeness. Do you guys remember the video game? Well, they got the video game now, but that was what the video game was all about. Is we had a video game that used his name, image, and likeness when he was playing for UCLA, sued and won that case. So then we had to then start talking about how do we let student athletes monetize their name, image, and likeness. And then it gets really congested with the number of lawsuits that are happening because these lawsuits continue to come. So right after the Alston case, or the O'Bannon case rather, we started allowing student athletes to get cost of attendance in addition to their scholarship. Then we started to change the rules when we went all the way back to the Supreme Court again for the second time with Alston. When we lost that case, then we said, okay, students can monetize their name, image, and likeness. So now we're back in court again. You're probably familiar with the House case. The House case is the one that we're trying to settle right now. And the thought on the settlement originally was that we will be able to settle the lawsuit about name, image, and likeness and pay student athletes for their name, image, and likeness, or have somebody else do that. And then we can reduce the number of lawsuits. What I've seen is the lawsuits have accelerated. And probably because they now have a target of what they might be able to sue against. So we're seeing more and more lawsuits coming our way right now. When we're talking about a settlement, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the settlement that before, well, the one that was before the judge. And we have to have another settlement presented to the judge by tomorrow. So September 26th is the day that we have to have another settlement between the prosecuting attorneys and defense attorneys have to present it to the judge for her approval. And when we first got into name, image, and likeness, there were two rules about name, image, and likeness. One is you had to perform work to be compensated, and two, you couldn't use it as a reducement for recruiting. And we found that there's not a lot of rules around that. It was very easy to get around that. Shortly thereafter, collectives were started, and people were collecting money so that they could pay players to participate. It wasn't true NIL. So now we're trying to figure out what does the next couple of years look like in college athletics. So that's where we are from a legal standpoint. I'd be happy to answer it. And I can stop here and ask if you have any questions about how we've got here and what is a major milestone for these legal cases. Does anybody have any questions about that before I get into conference expansion? Any questions? You guys got it completely wired. I'm glad to see that. Let's see, we'll talk a little bit about conference expansion. As you see, I mean, as I mentioned, there's all kinds of lawsuits going on. Obviously, we've got people suing the NCAA. We have, in our own league, we have schools in our league suing us. And just the other day, we got to a new level of lawsuits, and we have the Pac-12 suing the Mountain West. So now we have conferences suing conferences. It's absolutely stunning to me how many lawsuits are going on in college athletics or associated with college athletics today. But the formation of the ACC. The ACC was formed in 1953, and these are the 7 original schools, and those are their original logos back in 1953. And then shortly thereafter, we added Virginia. Then in the 70s, South Carolina dropped out. Georgia Tech was added to the league. And then back in the 80s, we added Florida State, Virginia Tech, and Miami. All of that, these 3 additions were to help us with football, to improve the brand of football. Basketball was the driving force of intercollegiate athletics. That's where all the money was. That's where the $1 billion television contract was. Basketball was the king of college athletics back in the 80s. And then it started moving into football into the 90s. The Big East Conference was formed as a basketball-only league because basketball was so popular. So the formation of leagues for a sport started way back in the 70s and 80s with the Big East. So now when you're talking about formation of leagues just for football, it's nothing new because it was back there. Basketball was the one that started all of that. Then in the 2000s, early 2000s, we added Boston College, Syracuse, and Pittsburgh as well. Then we had Maryland drop out. We had a lawsuit about that one. And then Louisville and Notre Dame was added with every sport except football. So we added those 2 sports in 2012. And then now in 2024, our first year, we've added Cal, Stanford. So we're now at 18 schools in the ACC, which makes no sense to me, but I understand why we've done it. And I'm not a big fan of it. Fortunately, we just got our basketball schedule last night, and we play Cal, Stanford, and SMU all at home, which is great. That also means next year we play all 3 of them on the road. So it's a different schedule. I mentioned some of these things about the history of the television contracts, but this is the historical perspective of when those contracts were created. And so what we're seeing is these contracts and the amount of commercial activity associated with sport has really driven the challenges that we have today. The differential between what salaries are, facilities are, and what a scholarship looks like is the problem that we're facing. And students are suggesting that, and the courts are agreeing with them, that the disparity is too great. There has to be more of a balance. But one of the challenges that we see is the challenge that what we have tried to build in college athletics has been broad-based programming with gender equity from the Title IX of 1972. And we tried to build it on competitive equity. We wanted to limit the number of coaches. We wanted to limit the number of scholarships. We wanted to limit the number of games. All of those limits were intended to have competitive equity. But what the courts have told us in the last 40 years is that we're in violation of antitrust. In 1984, they said you're in violation of antitrust, but there's a public good to what you do. We're going to give you great latitude to make decisions. So we made decisions for about 30 years that we thought were in the best interest of students. We provided more healthcare. We provided more academic support. We provided more mental health support. We provided more food. We provided cost of attendance. All of those things were expansion of benefits to students, and it was for all students in a broad-based program. But in 2021, the court said, you're still in violation of antitrust, and there's no public good to what you're doing. And so you have to change what you're doing, and will continue to be more punitive. That's what Brett Kavanaugh's letter on top of the 9-0 decision that the Supreme Court said. So I think that's why we're seeing all of these lawsuits we're seeing today. So how do we sort through that? How do we maintain a national governing body, national competition, recognizing we're in violation of antitrust and still provide resources for us to do that? That becomes the challenge that we have today. And so what are we doing here locally for NIL so that our students get monetized like this? When it first started, I mentioned collectives sprung up, and we had a couple of those were created here as well. We had a basketball group that was called the Secondary Break Club. They were collecting money so that they could provide opportunities for basketball student athletes to monetize their image and likeness. And then we had Heels for Life, which was a football collective that was providing opportunities for our football players. We've now taken all of that, put it under one umbrella called Carolina NIL. We still have the ability to raise money for those sports and provide those opportunities, but it's under one common umbrella called Carolina NIL. We also have a thing called the North Carolina Hall of Fame. And there's some discussion about creating a Hall of Fame for Carolina athletics. And so what that group is doing is basically buying future NIL rights of our student athletes and then asking them to promote the Hall of Fame. So we've got a not-for-profit North Carolina Hall of Fame, and then the two other collectives that now come under the group called Old Well Management. There's commercial activity associated with name, image, and likeness. So if a student athlete is going to promote a company and get paid to promote that company, that would be considered commercial activity associated with that NIL opportunity. If you're just promoting a not-for-profit or the North Carolina Hall of Fame, then you would be compensated to do that. That would be a separate use of money, and a separate way to get money from a donor to an entity to a student athlete. I mentioned the House settlement. The House settlement is going to have an impact on us. If the first proposal that was sent to the judge, and I think the settlement will get approved when it gets here, they had three major components to the settlement. The settlement said that we could revenue share 22% of our commercial revenue could be shared with student athletes. That's the first part. The other two parts have to do with roster size. It says you have to limit your rosters to a certain number. And we have 28 teams. We have 850 student athletes on those 28 teams. If next year we have the same 28 teams, we'll go from 850 student athletes to 735. We've never had roster caps. So if we wanted to have 65 on the lacrosse team, we could do that. If we wanted to have 40 on the baseball team, we could do that. If we wanted to have 120 in football, we could do that. And next year, it will go to 735. The big change for us would be scholarships. As I mentioned, we've limited scholarships to have an opportunity to have broad-based programming. So right now, you can have 11.7 scholarships in baseball. You can have 12.6 scholarships in lacrosse. You can have 9 scholarships in women's tennis. You can have 4.5 in golf. Every sport has a different level of scholarships. But now there's no limit on scholarships based on this new settlement. So we could have 735 scholarships next year. Currently, we have 320 that we divide over 500 student athletes. And then the other 300 student athletes we have are walk-ons. So next year, we're trying to make a decision now about how many scholarships do we want to offer if the settlement gets approved. And I really believe the settlement will get approved. There have been too many people involved for too long suggesting that the settlement is the way to go for it not to happen. The judge was asking for clarification on a couple of things, and I think she'll get that clarification within the next day or two. She doesn't have to rule on it until after the first of the year, but we will have a major challenge financially to find a way to revenue share 22% of our revenue and to provide additional scholarships if you want to meet 100% of the sum. I don't know if we'll be able to get there or not, but that's what our capacity will be as we move forward. I mentioned most of these things, but as I mentioned, there's all kinds of lawsuits that continue to come our way. Michigan, the former football players of Michigan are suing. Reggie Bush sued USC recently. We have the National Labor Relations Board cases with USC, with Dartmouth basketball. So whether or not we should classify student athletes as employees, and that will be a whole nother challenge for us. And so I do believe that we have about 3 to 5 more years of very turbulent time where we're going to try to figure out through these lawsuits what does college sports look like as we move forward. So let me stop there and see what kind of questions you have, because the students are certainly much more engaged in this process now. Yes, sir.
You said 22% of revenues. Is that revenue for all the student athletic endeavors at the university?
Yeah, the question is the 22% of revenue for all students for athletics? We have to fill out there's an NCAA financial report that we fill out every year. Multiple categories that we have to fill out, revenue and expense. And articulated in the settlement document, there are 8 revenue sources that are totaled up that equal, well, whatever that total is what's considered the commercial activity. And we could take those 8 categories and allocate them by sport back to that sport. Or you could take it in total and then figure out a different distribution for student athletes. The interesting thing about the settlement is the 22% is permissive, it's not required. So you may not do that if you don't have the money to do it, you can't do it, then you wouldn't have to provide those resources to student athletes. Let me back up a step. The reason it got settled at 22%, if you look at most pro franchises, pro leagues, about 50% of the commercial revenue goes to the players. If you take the 22% of that revenue plus the scholarships, that's about 50% of the revenue that we create. So that's how the settlement got negotiated between the plaintiffs' attorneys and the attorneys representing the conferences in the NCAA. I guess I wasn't clear on that. This lawsuit names the NCAA and the 5 power conferences. So those are the 6 defendants in this case. And then the prosecuting attorneys are suing those 6 entities for the right for us to share revenue. But I see the next big challenge for us is going to be the collision between Title IX and Title VII. Title VII is equal pay for equal work. Right now, if you have a scholarship, right now, and the example I used last year was Armando Bacot, Deja Kelly got the exact same scholarship. Hubert Davis and Courtney Banghart don't make the same amount of money. One is governed by Title VII, equal pay for equal work. There's more revenue associated with basketball. There's a lawsuit about in Southern Cal years ago that those are different jobs, so you pay them differently. Scholarships, which is an educational benefit, those are based on Title IX, those are equal benefits. So where does the commercial activity in sport at a university fit? We know in the NBA, WNBA, or any other professional league, there can be some pay disparity based on the revenue associated with that sport. It's just not the case at a college. And so how do we go about doing that? Which is going to be some debate about this revenue share. How much of the money in revenue share is going to come to the university and then we distribute to the participants? Or how much is going to be set outside the university in these commercial spaces that you could argue that's Title VII and you can compensate it? And then the larger question will be, can we make student athletes employees? Or if we do a revenue share, how do we pay the students and they not become employees? These are all kinds of legal challenges that we're going to face in the next couple of months.
Good morning. My name is Meredith Clark. I'm an associate professor of race and political communication here in the school. I want to go back to the question, or rather, where you started with your opening, talking about students and protesting and what have you. And I'm curious about how the university and how the athletics department is talking to student athletes about the issue of protest right now. And I couch that question in a little bit of history about student protest, right? So we know after the civil rights movement, towards the tail end of the civil rights movement and before the 80s, we saw Black student athletes in particular were really active in protest. We saw in 2015, for instance, the University of Missouri's football team made major changes to that university by refusing to play. So I'm curious, when we look at something like the fallout from Students for Fair Admission, the rollback of DEI programming and assistance for students, particularly the kind of students who are playing in a lot of the revenue sports, how is the university balancing their concerns about how the university's politics are shifting with their First Amendment rights to assemble and to petition for redress of grievances?
Yeah, great question. What we try to do is where I try to explain the right as a U.S. citizen, a university community member, then a team member. What we really just tried to emphasize is when you're called to play, that's when your team rules exist. Beyond that, they have the same rights, freedoms, and of expression, and everything else as any other student on campus to join and participate in any protest or anything they would like. We also have a number of affinity groups within the athletic department that support our student athletes in a lot of different ways. And Cricket Lane, she oversees our student wellness program. In all of those groups, she works very closely with all of them to make sure that they feel very supported in any of those things that they want to do. So it's just when it's the call to action. When you come for a competition, that's when you are limited in what you can do. But beyond that, we encourage our students to participate fully in the entire university, no matter what it is. And I think a lot of them do. I remember, gosh, I don't remember which year it was, but we had one of our students on our track program organize a walk down Franklin Street. I think we had a couple of hundred of our student athletes participate in that. So it's completely up to our students and what they want to do. Yes, sir.
Knowing you're a student athlete yourself at one point, do you still think that's a fair term to be used given this time? And then second to that, thoughts on the Matthew Saluka situation? If you're aware of that, it just came out in the last 10 hours.
What is that?
He's the current quarterback at UNLV. I think they've had a successful season so far, but he's decided to withdraw from the team and will not play anymore, take a red shirt because his NIL commitments were not met with his satisfaction.
Well, okay, okay. Yeah, do I still believe in the term student athlete? I certainly do. There's 500,000 student athletes that participate in college athletics. The NCAA is a national governing body for almost 1,200 schools. Division I, Division II, Division III, there's roughly 400 in each of those divisions. And so what we really seem to focus on are the highest profile students in the highest profile sports. And we know that there's only a handful of sports that are generating all this revenue that are supporting everybody else. So that's the tension that we're feeling right now, is that if you generate it, you should get it, which is really different than what happens nationally. If I've looked at the government for the last 30 years, it's, let's tax the 1% so that everybody else has some benefit. In college athletics today, it's 1% is generating all the revenue, and how do we get more money to the 1%? We've been doing revenue share for the last 50 years. Generate as much as you can, provide as many opportunities as you can. But the courts have told us you can't do that right now, so it's swinging back the other way. So I'm sure we'll find an equilibrium in there, but I believe of the 500,000 students that participate, there's probably 25,000 that participate in the highest level of football and basketball. So that's really the group that we are trying to figure out, how do we treat them and how do we treat them differently in an educational environment. I firmly believe that, at least in Carolina, and I did go to Washington prior to COVID. And I said, we have 4 values at Carolina. At least that's what I was presenting as an athletic department. the number one, we wanted to emphasize that we want to provide a great education for every kid that we invite here to participate in sport. Our number one goal is to give them a great education. Number two is we want to maximize the opportunities to play. So we have 28 teams, 850 kids. We think that is really important to have that opportunity. Go to college, get a great education, play. Number three is there's very limited path to play professional football or basketball. You basically had to go through college. Now basketball is getting a little bit better, but football, there still isn't a way to play professionally without going to college. So how do we increase the number of choices that students have that want to do that? And now I'm starting to think that it's not just a choice for a student, but it's going to be a choice for a school. What choices do the schools have? Do you want to participate at this level? If we're going to pay some people to play a game, then maybe a school's going to say, "No, I don't want to do that. That's beyond what I'm interested in doing." And so I think the choices, we have to really think about what are those choices available. And then the fourth one is the commercial activity. That is, all right, now we have our values of what we think is important. How do we fund that? But I think is what we end up talking about first is the commercial activity, and then say, okay, what are we gonna do with the money? First, I think you have to identify what is most important to you, then try to create the revenue to support what you talked about. And so that's the message I was trying to communicate to Washington. And I still believe in those same core values, but certainly the environment has changed, the legal environment in particular has changed. So I think we have to really consider what is most important and who wants to participate at that level. I do think this election is incredibly important to the future of college athletics, because this is the first time in the history that at least I'm aware of, that all three branches of government are now involved in college athletics. Obviously, you've got the judicial system with the Supreme Court and every other court of the land in athletics business. You've got the National Labor Relations Board, which is governed by the executive branch. So the president appoints the NLRB. And then you've got everybody going to Congress trying to get laws changed and create an exemption for college athletics, or at least a national law that will preempt some of the state law. So all three branches are going to be involved. So this election, no matter how it goes in any of those, whether it's the House, the Senate, or the presidential election, is going to have a significant impact on the future of college athletics. And we're all sitting here just kind of wondering what it's going to be and reacting to these lawsuits, as opposed to creating a plan and saying, this is where we want to be, and let's have a plan to get there. And I think there's a couple of ways to do it. And I think that one, I do think that we need to think about football, treat football differently, and figure out a way for football to aggregate the rights, generate more money, pay players, and then have money left over to fund the rest of the operation. How we do that, I'm not exactly sure what that path looks like, but I think that's the best plan I've heard so far that makes sense.
I have a question. So I know that you were just kind of talking about it, but how do you think that this is going to change, like the way that the conferences interact with each other, and like the way that students take and choose, you know, if they want to play sports, if they want to play for Carolina, if they want to play for like another school, like a student who was previously chosen to be on like the football team here, but now isn't generating the same amount of money that they would at Carolina versus another school, like, and how that would affect the way that the team operates and the way that, you know, sporting is viewed from an outside perspective.
That's a great question. I think that for years, most students have been selecting a school based on the fit, the academic climate, the education that they want to pursue, and quite frankly, whether or not they received a scholarship to go to that particular school. I do think in football and basketball in particular, there's more and more NIL activity and more money involved in the decision process than there's ever been. So that's a little bit disheartening and concerning for me. But I'd say for 80–90% of students, they're still making the decision based on what's the best place for me to go to school? What's the best fit for me? And what kind of education will I get there? But that could change over time. But I do think that most students are still making the decision based on location, quality of the education, the people I'm going to be around, the curriculum that's there. I think that's still going to be the case. The conferences, I do think we're going to have, at some point, we're going to have to get some kind of consolidation. And I think you're starting to see from the Power 5, the 4, maybe the 2, whether or not that happens. I hope it doesn't, because I think that the broader we are, the better we are. I think that the impact that consolidation will have on high school sports, youth sports, I think will be significant. I think that we have an obligation in higher education to try to provide those opportunities because I think that attracts people to come to college. I think it helps our youth sports in the country. I think it helps physical fitness. My concern is that if we only really chase after the elite program, they'll have fewer opportunities. There'll be fewer people at the younger youth level wanting to participate in sport to get a scholarship to go to college. I think that'll have an impact. I think it has an impact on the Olympic movement. 70 or 80% of our medalists in the Olympics played in college. So if we start to shrink that pool, it's going to impact our Olympic movement. So I think we have to think about ways to incentivize it. What I think will probably happen, the conferences may not be as broad in their sports offering. I think we're going to see more federation by sport. I think we'll see rules that will apply to field hockey, that will apply to swimming, that will apply to track, that won't necessarily be an overall arching NCAA rule. I think the conference champion, the national championships might be governed by the national governing body instead of by NCAA. I think some of these things are changing now. A couple of years ago, men's gymnastics merged with the national governing body for gymnastics. They hosted the championship. We've done some things with field hockey, the national governing body out of Charlotte. I think we'll see more and more of that as we move forward, less of it at NCAA level. What the NCAA's legal strategy right now, best I can tell, is the NCAA is in violation of antitrust. So they're trying to push that responsibility to the conference, to the school, and get themselves out of the antitrust business. And so you're seeing a push to the conferences. I'll see the conferences then pushing it to the national government.
I'm curious to know how your athletic department kind of treats personal branding for student athletes, specifically on social media. Do you ever encourage or discourage some of your student athletes from posting certain things or maybe not touching certain areas or topics?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I should have touched on that. So we do have a team of people in the athletic department that are helping students create images and things for NIL. We're allowed to do that now. 2 years ago, we weren't. So the rules are changing relative to that. And when this first passed in 2021, we did say as a department, our student athletes are going to compete for us, with us, and against us. And by that, I mean, we have a student athlete right now who's sponsored by Adidas. And so the question is, when can that student wear Adidas? When can't they? What can they post? What can't they post? So, we have sponsors that support the department and we revenue share that with all of our student athletes. So we want to make sure that they still have that same right and exclusivity that they bargained for. Yet we want to give the student the right to do what they want to do to monetize their own name and likeness. The difference is whether or not you're wearing a North Carolina mark and whether or not you're using the IP, the intellectual property, which is our licensing of the marks and logos. So if you want to advertise for Adidas, you can't wear a Carolina gear. If you are going to promote your event, then you can be in your Carolina gear for what, hey, game tomorrow, it will help. And so we have a creative team that helps both with video and with still images that help promote. Now, if a student athlete is you probably saw in the Final Four last year, we had Armando and Elliot, both were doing advertisements for national brands. Elliot did one with Marriott, they had the bandwidth. So they paid a licensing fee for that to be supported by the university brand. He got paid, the university got paid, and Marriott got the ad. Armando's didn't have the university marks with TurboTax. He got paid, TurboTax paid for the advertisements as well. We were not involved with those other than granting the IP rights for the Elliot's. But as far as social media posts and things like that, we can help create those graphics and help the students do that. So we have a couple of studios within campus where those things can be designed as well.
So looking back at a recent case of the NCAA UNC with Breeze Brentmeyer in the tennis team, where the NCAA restricted her from playing because whether she had taken prize money or not, and now she's suing the NCAA. But even you guys trying everything you could to get the NCAA to understand that they just had to look at things. How has it been from a from an executive perspective to deal with NCAA often just not getting things done or not processing things and just being like, they can't play, you can't let them play.
Trying to get me in trouble.
No, just trying to like, how has it been?
Yeah, we, obviously, they're our national governing body, but like any other organization, there, at some point you get into a disagreement. On that particular case, I think that, Reese and her family were doing everything imaginable. So the case is, we have a current, student athlete, a women's tennis player. She played in the US Open a couple of years ago and won a couple of rounds and won prize money. The rule in tennis is you can accept prize money up to your expenses. The debate was, what were the expenses that were allowable? And in my personal view, is that they were asking for pretty reasonable expenses. And the NCAA denied some of those expenses. And then it got very contentious because while they were in the denial business, she was ineligible to play. And so she missed an entire semester of competition because they were debating with the NCAA on what it were expenses or not. And so I think at some point she just got fed up. The attorney got in touch with her and said, I think you have a lawsuit here because you have all these other, and the part of the lawsuit is you've got all these other student athletes out there that are getting NIL money, but it's pay for play is what it is. And so you should have been able to take that prize money and still be eligible to participate. And so she said, fine, if you want to take the case, take the case. So that's the lawsuit that's going forward. And I don't think it would have happened if the NCAA would have been more reasonable on their allowance of what her expenses were. So I do think that on occasion that the national governing body gets boxed in because of precedent or just poor decision making that have led to some of these lawsuits. And we've been in a couple of these ourselves debating with our national governing body. So again, the number of lawsuits on the screen there previously, there's constantly lawsuits, people bickering over, you know, who should get the money. I believe she's on the right side of that issue, and I think she'll win. She was just joined by another woman who played this year, who's going to go to the University of Texas. And I think both of them will win. And we've had professional athletes play college athletics. In fact, we had one here just a couple of years ago. Houston Summers, our student body president, was a professional baseball player, finished his professional baseball career, came here as a student and became student body president and was participating in our track team. So I think all of us about the money, I think we're all past that now. It's just going to be, hey, if you're a full-time student and you want to participate, we'll let you participate. And I think that's where we're headed. The other thing about this compensation, I don't know where it's going to fall out. But I've said this before, we have 6,000 students on campus today that we pay. And there's got to be a way for us to figure out how to pay some of these student athletes and not the employees, because we're paying all those other people. And some of them are residents and some are GAs, some are TAs, and it's not perfect, but there has to be a category here. I think long-term, what I think the play at Congress would be, let's create a group of student athletes that you can pay that wouldn't necessarily be considered employees, but would have the right to collectively bargain. I think that's where we're headed. Collectively bargaining. We're in violation, again, I'm not a lawyer, so you correct me if I'm wrong. I've been told a lot that when you're in violation of antitrust, there's only two ways to not be in violation of antitrust. Get a federal exemption, and I don't think we're gonna get one, or collectively bargain. So to me, that seems to be the obvious choice to me, that we have to figure out a way to get there. But how do you collectively bargain? You got 500,000 student athletes. I don't think that's good. You've got people that are playing, you know, really obscure sport. Some are playing highly commercial sports. So you're never going to get one group to represent 500,000 student athletes. So you have to get a smaller group, and you have to have somebody has to negotiate. You have to have two parties to negotiate. And I've said this before. I actually thought that the college football playoff, there's one management group and one group of students that play. To me, that was the one that should have negotiated. CFP could have negotiated to pay football players. And you wouldn't have to pay them all the same. I mean, if you're in one league, maybe you get this much. If you're in a different league, you get a little bit less, a little bit less. And then if you get the college football playoff, maybe you get more. Maybe there's a participant pool that you draw out of that. So I still believe that that's where we're headed. Now, how quickly we get there, I don't know, but I don't see any other path out personally. I didn't mess it up too badly. Close enough. What else? Oh, sorry.
looking at like the Pac-12 and kind of how Florida State's also been fighting the case, do you think there's going to be a lot of struggles between individual universities and conferences? Because I mean, that'll inevitably have some impact on the different.
Yeah, I think so. It's unfortunate. As we've said, it was pretty collegial. To me, one of the really good decisions that the NCAA made, believe it or not, but it happened 30 years ago. When they signed the $1 billion basketball contract, 50% of that money roughly went into a participation pool. And then 50% went into broad-based programming, scholarships. So it's an incentive to have broad-based programming. So we actually get compensated from the NCAA by the number of sports that we have, number of scholarships that are offered. And then the rest of the money goes into your participation in the tournament. And so to me, those were decisions that said, hey, we're going to raise the money. And then we're going to think about the money that we have, what's the best use of that money? And so that we were all trying to create equity and some trying to reasonable competition across the country. What we're seeing, and that's what Florida State and Clemson are basically saying, look, we're the bigger brands, we should get more money. If you go down that model, the bottom half is going to struggle. And I don't think I think you have to find a balance there. Because if they're successful and we do that, we may end up in that position. Obviously, we're going to be okay in that. We'll get more money because we're one of the better brands in our league. But then you're going to say, okay, what about the SEC? Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma, they're going to get a lot of money. Some of the smaller schools, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, they're going to get less. It just is going to create such an imbalance within your league that only the best schools with the most money are going to win the most games. I just don't think that's good for college athletics. And so if you're trying to go to Congress and get any kind of national governance structure, you need all 50 states to participate. You can't go there and say, you know what, we've got 25 really good schools that are going to win everything. How about an exemption? You need a broad-based program. And I think it's good for the country. I think it's good. Look at all the things I said previously. So I see it happening. I just don't think it's good. It'll happen for a while, would be my guess. Then we'll kind of go back to it. But that probably combines the cameras.
Your PowerPoint's very impressive and it looks very good. I hope you had a Hussman student or graduate assist you in that PowerPoint presentation. What I want to ask you about is, just to expand just a second, high school NIL. And some states have it, some states don't. Some high school students are suing their state for not permitting them to have high school NIL opportunities. What kind of opportunities and challenges is that causing you and your peer athletic directors at the collegiate level? Thank you.
Well, that's a great question. Right, as much as you take a deep breath about NIL at the collegiate level, you take it at the high school level. Missouri was really early in this. Missouri passed a law that you could monetize your name, image, and likeness in high school if you went to a Missouri school. I thought, brilliant. We should have thought of that. And so again, it just confuses the decision-making process. So are we really in sport at the high school level to make money? I've for years and years and years. In fact, we've got a thing coming up October 1st. So what is that, next week? Jay Billis is coming up. Jim Delaney will be here. We have a couple other folks on. Courtney Aranza on our diving team. We're going to have a panel to talk about the future of college athletics. Jay has been talking about this for a long time. And the example that people use is if a musician is here and they go out and play a gig on Saturday night, they can make money on it. I agree. That is 100% accurate. For years, student athletes could monetize their gift in their sport by giving lessons. So if you're a tennis player, this is 10 years ago, you could go out and give tennis lessons and make money. And so to me, that was more analogous to the musician than saying, hey, I'm a popular kid, a popular sport, and I should be paid because I'm popular. It doesn't really have as much to do with your ability to help somebody else do something or provide the music. I just didn't think that was a good argument to use. That's way off the point. I do think that the decision about NIL for high school kids is not going to be good for high school kids. somebody in our office suggested in 2021 that we should create a company and go out and buy for $5,000, the top 100 basketball players in the country. You could give them $5,000, say, I'll represent you going forward on NIL. And so I think is what you're seeing are agents getting right into the business saying, I'll represent you at the collegiate level. I'll broker you to the best colleges and I'll get a piece of your future earnings, but I'll do that for you. So you're seeing a lot of people that are now trying to become agents for high school kids. We've seen it at the collegiate level. And I'm saying things today I never thought I'd say in my wildest dreams. The athletes that we have right now that are the easiest to work with, that have the best NIL situations, are the ones that have agents. And I 5 years ago, we were calling the Secretary of State saying, hey, we've got agents meddling with our kids. Come over here and arrest this person. Now we're saying, gosh, we wish we had more agents helping our kids. So it's a dichotomy that we're trying to work through because for the good ones, there's a real benefit to it. And these students are making good money. And Armando, I think, is a great example of somebody that understood where NIL was going. He had a financial background himself. He was very ambitious and he was very successful in doing things in a really thoughtful way. And I think it'll set him up for life. But I think there's an awful lot of students that were paid a lot of money for really doing nothing. And I don't think that's a real good thing for them long term. When they finish here and they don't play anymore, they go get a real job, you're expected to show up, you're expected to work, and the compensation isn't what it was. I think it's gonna be very disappointing. So that's the downside. We also have the only coach in the country, I think, who she was eligible to monetize her name, image, and likeness as a student athlete. Now she's our coach in Aaron Matson. So we've got somebody who's really good at trying to explain what this environment looks like to our student athletes and quite frankly to our coaches. So there, like in most things, there's a real upside to it, but I do think we've got to be careful that there's a downside as well. We have to try to find the downside.
Obviously, in recent years, there's been a big shift, like, just in the transfer portal. How do you think, the NIL will, like, be affected with the House settlement? And do you think that there's a risk that Carolina athletics because of the ease that athletics do?
Transfer portal is another really good question. It's something that, again, as we made those rules, that 30-year window, we're trying to make rules that we thought was helpful. And I think most of them, they were well intended. The transfer portal, every student was allowed to transfer and be immediately eligible, except 5 sports. It was football, the 2 basketballs, baseball, and ice hockey. If you played those 5, the graduation rates were low. And so the idea was, how do we get these graduation rates up? Well, we know that if you transfer, your chance of graduating goes down. And so we put in this year of residency. That if you transfer, you have to sit out. So you can transfer, but you have to sit. And we thought, well, that you could get academically caught back up, then you'd be able to graduate. But freedom of movement and the ability to, if coaches can leave, then students should be able to. So we said, okay, I got to get rid of that one, because that was another one of the challenges in the course. And so the number of students that transferred rose dramatically, not just in those sports, but in all the sports. Transferring is something pretty easy to do. I do think that what we're getting to now is more contracts with NIL. So if we're gonna pay you, now you're gonna be more tethered to the university than you've been before. And so what happens if there's a coaching change? Do we write that into the contract? Do we try to negotiate a contract before the end of the season so that the student will have to stay for the next season? And these are really tough things for students that are 18, 19, 20 years old to say, okay, what do I want to do? Is this the best place for me? What happens if I have a great year? Can I get compensated more if I go further? Do I want to stay at this school? What happens if something happens at home and I'm far away from home and I want to go, but I have a contract to stay? We're going to get into more lawsuits. And somebody asked a question earlier about a default on a payment. You're going to see more defaults on payments because supposedly it's not a pay-for-play agreement. And who are you going to sue? You've got this kind of an amorphous group called the collection. They may or may not be incorporated. But if I agree with you, I'm going to pay you $1,000 to play or $10,000. And all of a sudden you play that and I say, I'm not going to pay you. You're going to have to sue. So now you're at 19, you got to go to an attorney. You got to say, okay, do we have a contract? Is it written? Is it not? Is it enforceable? Is it not? How do I collect my money? And so you're going to see more and more lawsuits relative to those compensation terms. is tough.
Thanks again for being here, Bubba. We really appreciate it. You have a lot of sports journalists in the room. You have some student athletes in the room, and some folks who can imagine working in college athletics, professional sports. You've been in this field a long time. What is it that you tell young people these days about getting into this line of work and how best to be prepared? And what is it that you see in young people coming in that you're having to foster more of or encourage more from them?
Great question. And question earlier about the PowerPoint in Hussman School. We have 50 students that work in our media communication center that Ken Cleary runs, and whether it's directors, producers, camera operators, it's a fantastic learning experience. And we couldn't have the ACC network if it wasn't for the students in the Hussman School of Terminal. So those of you, then some of you in here may be the ones that are doing that with us. And if you're not, you're interested in doing that, we'd love to have you think about it, because that is the kind of the backbone of what we do. Last night's soccer game was produced by a lot of our students. So if you haven't seen it, I know the Carroll Hall thing is absolutely, or the Curtis Media Center is terrific. But we have a similar setup over there, and that's how we produce a lot of our games. You should come over and see it, because it is something special. With 28 teams, we have 13 different venues, 8 of them that we televise from. But every video that you see, whether it's on our website, whether it's in a venue, or the live production of these games, that's done. A lot of students are doing those things. So it's very exciting. But as far as college athletics for me, I absolutely love it. I've worked on a college campus for many, many years. My dad went to school on the GI Bill, so scholarship to go was incredibly important to him. So he was in the Marines, then went to college on the GI Bill. So that's what I think college athletics is about, is providing those opportunities to go to college, play a sport, get a scholarship, get a great education, totally change their life. The optimism, the enthusiasm, the excitement that students bring, that coaches bring, is something I think is really, really special. The ability to create a sense of community through sport. You know, we have 200 events a year. We've got 1 million people coming. That's what, to me, really benefits colleges and universities. When I had a series of other jobs before I became an AD, and when I became an AD, thinking about, if I ran an athletic department, what would the mission be for college athletics for me? And so I became the AD of Ball State, and our mission was that we're here to enhance the educational experience of all the students. It wasn't about the 400 that played at Ball State. It was about the 17,000 that we were fully supported by the university. We didn't make any money. All of our revenue, most of it was coming from the university. So if we don't benefit every student on campus, we shouldn't exist. Because I still feel the same way. If our brand, if our teams, if our venues, if our events don't represent this university and make it better, we shouldn't exist. The core mission of what we do is provide an education. Sports is a great add-on, and we take great pride in it. We wear the colors, and we love the games, but it's here to make the educational experience better. So now our mission here, and we tweaked it a couple of times, and the staff here changed it when I got here, is we educate and inspire through athletics. So that's what we're all about. We want our students to get a great education in the classroom. We think we complement that education through sport. And yet our programs and our kids are inspirational. They're inspirational to me. They're inspirational to alumni. They're inspirational to younger people to be a part of it. So to me, that's what I'm so concerned that the commercial activity will pull that apart. And I really don't want that to happen. We've got to figure out where is that right balance. I understand that we have an imbalance in the commercial activity, but we've got to rebalance that. But I don't want to lose all the good things associated with sport participation and the sense of community that it builds. So that's really where I think attention lies. And I think we can figure it out. There's too much invested, too much money, too much success for it to fail. But if we don't pay attention to it, it's going to look very, very different. So we got to make sure we go.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the athletic department has tried to, for a long time, increase attendance in lesser known sports. And like get people to go to lesser known events, which like Fever Points was a big thing for that. But also when that was implemented, I feel like a lot of people were like, okay, that's now this opportunity to go to these things and get points. But also when people no longer have senior tickets for the Duke game, how was that received by people? And like after 2 years having implemented, has it worked to have the Fever Point system?
Yeah, I think so. And we do try to get people to come and experience all the sports, and we create an incentive. I mean, the Duke basketball game is a huge incentive. So how do you get people to come and, go to field hockey, go to soccer, go to volleyball? Create a point system that says, hey, the more you participate in all these other activities, we'll give you a higher probability of going to the Duke basketball game. And that's our number one thing. And it has helped. I mean, I don't know if anybody went to the field hockey game on Friday night, huge crowd. I mean, that was unbelievable for the opening game. Which, by the way, that game was what, 5-0 against Syracuse, and then 7-0 against Liberty on Sunday, 12-0 last two games. They went to number one poll, by the way. And then Ramesses led a large group from field hockey over to men's soccer. The men's soccer was playing state. It's just absolutely fantastic. So I was at a soccer game last night, and somebody reminded me that I don't know how many games we've played yet this fall. We've lost 3 games all year. We've lost 1 football game, 1 volleyball match, and 1 soccer game. And we're darn near in October. I mean, these kids are having an unbelievable fall. I couldn't be more excited about what's going on. It's terrific. But that's what we want people to be a part of. Because you may not. I mean, I had no idea when I first went to Ball State. I didn't know you watered the field at field hockey. I didn't know anything about field. I thought they were kidding me. We're watering astroturf. What in the world's going on? And so I think those are things that you want in college. Experience something different. Go to a lacrosse game. Go to a field hockey. Go to something you don't really know anything about. And I just don't mean sports. I mean, that's all across campus. So I just think that that's what college is about. So trying to encourage people to do that is part of what we're trying to do.
I'm just curious if you thought that behind all these lawsuits from teams and players, is there any underlying feeling in addition to this monetary?
Yeah, we have a student athlete advisory group, and it's really all across the board. I mean, we started before NIL, it was 2019 or so. We started talking about, because you see it bubbling up. And I know Mac Brown uses the example with Sam Howell, but we went to the football team and said, hey, we're talking about hanging the likeness. And what do you think? And we did a little poll, like an athlete said, do you think he should be paid for autographs? Do you think he should be paid for creating streets? Do you think he should be paid? And it was interesting to see the different folks vote. But with football, Sam did not like NIL because he said, I'm the quarterback. I know I'll get great opportunities, but a lot of my teammates won't. I don't think that's fair. I went and spoke to the Student Athlete Advisory Committee, which is represented by all sports. We got the swimmers and the benches of the track and going, if all the money starts moving to football and basketball, we feel like our sports could be a risk. And so we don't think that's a good idea. Is there a way for this to be more equitable, more fair? And so, I think our students really understand the implications of it. And at some point, the commercial activity is going to stretch. We have to figure out where it's going to land. And so that's what where does it land? Can we maintain maximum number of opportunities and compensate? I think we've got to figure out a way to do that. I think it's good.
Thank you. That is a great question. And I see that this will be our last question because I promised you an hour and you will get an hour of time and you will get breakfast just out in the hallway. So please, let's ask the last question and make sure there's time before you get to your questions.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, in terms of just like that ballot, how those ballots impacting in all the sports, while also investing a fair amount in football, considering that football is just increasing the economic, driver, as you talked about in college sports, and then with that, you have spoken about, you have to just talk about the night commission proposal and some of those.
Yeah, I do think, football is absolutely driving this, right? And the number of people involved with football, the commercial activity around football, I think it needs to be addressed separately. And we'll continue to invest. We've invested an awful lot in football over the years and we'll continue to because it is so important. But I believe in all of them. But if I look at the success we've had, we finished 7th in the Directors' Cup last year. But I think if I look at our finances, we're probably in the 30s or 40s in total revenue for what we do. We have a really broad program. We're in a great league, a great location. We have great student athletes, great coaches. We have some competitive advantages that money isn't going to fix. Now, certainly more money is always helpful. but it's not a one-to-one relationship. But I will say that you have to have at least the bottom line. You can't sit here and say, hey, we're gonna be good because we think we're gonna be good. You have to operations, which we're doing. So I think we're kind of in that sweet spot now, but if there's more separation between the elite and where we are, we will have a problem. So the challenge that I have right now is how do we continue to put on the gas for revenue? Because I do think we have to have more revenues to have to continue to. When I first got here, I went to corporate Rotary and we had a $70 million budget. So what do you think your budget should be to be competitive? I said about 100 million. I came back to the council meeting and got, well, wait, they didn't think that was a very good idea, but now we're 140 million. So our revenue continues to grow. And we have to figure out ways to do that because I really believe we're trying to support this broad-based program. We're not trying to support 150 kids. We want to support 800. Now, next year, 735. How are we going to do that so they get a great frame to represent schools really, really well? The thing I want to end with is, and I got to it a little bit, I was at some of these things, talking about lawsuits, talking about money, talking about media rights, conference affiliation. That's the least favorite part of my job. I love going to games, like going to our student athlete advice committee, love going to Leadership Academy, love interacting with our students and watching them grow and participate and really enjoy their experience here at Carolina. And that's what really drives the passion. I would love for the decisions and discussions about how do we finance it to be less public, but I don't think we can. But I want to truly communicate the best thing about it, our students, the coaches, the games, practices, and the personal development that we have. So it is a great spot. So the question earlier about, why do you like it? I love it because of the people that are involved.
At 9:30, but if you want to grab something to eat before you run, or if you want to step back and join here, you're welcome to do that. Thank you so much for coming to our first event. Good to see you guys.
Sorry, Jack. You're here.